Hello and welcome to the Charge for Change program information session. My name is Emily Farju and I'm the project manager for the Charge for Change program brought to you by Aviva Canada and Earth Day Canada. I'm very happy to be here with you today to give you more details about the program and answer any questions you may have. My coworker, Kristen Mullin, Director of Development at Earth Day Canada, is here with me to help with any technical difficulties and monitor your questions as you enter them in the Q&A section of the webinar. She will also help answer any of your questions in the second half of the information session. I'm joining you from Toronto, and I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that the land I'm joining from is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. All right, I'll start the presentation now, and I will share my screen with you. All right, so as you can see on this slide, the Charge for Change program aims at bringing EV charging infrastructure to your community. And the way it is doing so is through the investment that Aviva Canada will make to fund EV charging infrastructure in underserved communities across Canada. And we'll go back to that a little bit later, but what we mean by underserved communities in Canada are communities that have less than the provincial average in their province in the number of charging stations. Before we dive into it, I wanted to go over the points that we will cover today. So first, we'll talk about the program objectives and the available funding. Then we'll go over Aviva Canada and Earth Day Canada roles within the program. Then we'll cover the advantages for communities and the positive impacts on society and the environment of the program. And then we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of the program with the timeline, the eligibility criteria, and then last but not least, the application process. So to start with, the program objective, the main objective is to fund electric vehicle charging stations in underserved communities across Ontario, as I've mentioned before. And that means that for that, $750,000 per year will fund EV infrastructure for the next 3 years. At least 3 communities per year will receive funding, with a maximum funding available for each community being $250,000, covering 100% of the project costs. Now, if the community project costs are low, more communities will be able to benefit from the program. Note that preference will still be given to communities that can maximize funding by installing more chargers. Now, as I said, the program is brought to you by Aviva Canada and Earth Day Canada, and I wanted to go over the roles of each organization within the program to clarify everything. So Aviva's role will be to provide the fund for the Charge for Change program, and they will also be a member of the selection committee to choose which community will receive the funding. As for Earth Day Canada role, it's more on a daily operation management role, which, for example, is to provide information sessions like this one, but also provide support to applicants during the application period through a dedicated email that Kristen will put in the chat for you. And then Earth Day Canada will also be part of the selection committee to choose the beneficiary communities. And once we move on to the next phase of the program, which will be the construction of the charging stations, Earth Day Canada will remain there to provide support and check in with the communities to see how the projects are going. And finally, it will distribute the funds once the projects are completed. So now let's talk a little bit about the advantages for communities and what positive impacts on society and the environment the Charge for Change program will bring. So by financing 100% of the project costs for the community projects, the program will help remove the financial barrier for communities to install EV infrastructure. And that will lead to supporting citizens in transitioning from fossil fuel vehicles to electric vehicles, because we know that for individuals, the transition to EVs is a little bit maybe concerning. They fear that if they switch to EVs, they won't be able to charge their vehicles after. So being able to provide the funding to the communities to provide the infrastructure will get the ball rolling, if you will. And then by removing the fossil fuel vehicles off the roads, we will reduce the GHG emissions overall. So now if we move into the detail of the program, which I'm sure you all want to know about, the program was launched in December last year, with the application period opening on January 3rd this month. And the application period will remain open until March 22nd. Then we will move into the application review period and the selection of the beneficiary communities, with a public announcement that will be made before Earth Day, the week of April 17th. After that, from April to the end of the year, this is where the EV infrastructure construction will happen. And from January to March 2024, this is when the funds will be distributed to each of the communities that were selected. Now, you may notice the asterisk there on the slide. It is because this period may vary depending on when each of the projects are completed and when the supporting documents will be received by Earth Day Canada. Now, the eligibility criteria are available on the Charge for Change program website and also in the application guide that maybe some of you have seen and read. But I wanted to take some time today to go over them with you to clarify anything that needed to be clarified. So the first eligibility criterion is that the project must be located in the province of Ontario. For 2023, the program will be only made available to communities in Ontario, with a possibility that in the following years, the program will be open to other provinces. So make sure to come back again in 2024 when the program opens again. The second eligibility criterion is that the applicant must be a municipality or an Indigenous community with less than 100,000 residents, and that there must be less than one public electric vehicle charging station per 8,610 people within a community. And that is the provincial average for Ontario. So that's what I was saying before when I was talking about the underserved communities. Communities need to have less than the provincial average to qualify for the program. Now, I wanted to take some time here to talk about what is a public electric vehicle charging station. And within the program, what we mean by a public electric vehicle charging station is the fact that a charging station is open to the general public. It doesn't really matter if the charging station is publicly or privately owned, or if it is on a publicly or privately owned land. What makes it public is that anyone and everyone can charge their vehicle there. Now, the next eligibility criterion is that the applicant must be able to satisfy legal, insurance, and other regulatory obligations with respect to the installation, use, and maintenance of the EV charging stations. And the applicant must also be able to submit all project costs and fulfill its initial financial commitments as further discussed in the application guide. So what we mean by submitting all project costs is that quotes of the anticipated expenditures must be submitted during the application process, and fulfilling the initial financial commitment means that the costs will have to be paid upfront by the communities that apply, and they will get the funds once the project is completed, as I mentioned in the like on the slide for the timeline earlier. Continuing with the rest of the eligibility criteria. So all project sites, in particular the electric vehicle charging stations, must be branded with Aviva Canada and Earth Day Canada branding, and those will be provided to the selected communities. Now, this next point here is to make sure that when the project is being implemented, it is not breaking any environmental laws. And it is something to keep in mind because these laws may change, depending on the site that the project will be built on. So that is something that you will have to check site per site. Now, when it comes to the infrastructure itself, the charging station needs to be a permanent installation. It can be either mounted or fixed, but it has to be permanent. It needs to be a new charger installation, be certified for use in Canada, and it needs to be a standard level 2 charger. Level 3 chargers will not be considered for this program. And finally, the chargers will have to be able to communicate through wireless signal on status and report on usage and other capabilities. Finally, the last eligibility criterion is that the projects will have to increase localized charging opportunities in one of the following spaces, and it's not limited to those, but we're talking about public places, on-street, multi-unit residential buildings, and workplaces as defined in the application guide. So finally, let's talk about the application process, which is, I think, the main reason you're here. So this process is a two-part process. The first step will be to fill out an online form available on the Charge for Change website. And Kristen, again, can put the link in the chat for you there. And then the second part will be to send supporting documents to the dedicated email address that you see on the screen. And those supporting documents are detailed below as well. So we will need a detailed project budget, a quote from service contractors to substantiate the expected project costs, and finally a list of the specific locations where electric vehicle chargers will be installed. So with that said, this brings me to the end of the presentation, and we will now move on to the Q&A period that will not be recorded. So for those of you who are watching online, know that an FAQ section is available on the Charge for Change program website, and that another Q&A session will be held in February. Thanks again for attending.